today we have the pleasure of welcoming Frank Wiengarten from Barcelona, Spain. Frank is the research director as well as the vice dean of research at ESADE. And correct me, Frank, if I pronounce it wrong, in ESADE in Barcelona, Spain, one of the premier universities in Spain. And he's here with us about a research paper he's written about how culture, local culture, plays such an important role. And if executives, CEOs, and chief operating officer, basically the C-level, if they understand culture well, how they can use it to improve supply chain integration as well as profitability. So with that, Frank, welcome. And I read your paper with a lot of interest and amazing read. And I was wondering if you, I would ask a very, very simple and from my perspective, a dumb question. There were two words that kind of got me in there. One was, if you were to explain to my grandmother, what does the word in layman's term national collectivism, and the second one, neighborhood of symptom rule. What do the words mean to somebody who has no idea about research, but maybe is my grandmother or maybe runs a very small business? So over to you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Hitendra, and for giving me a platform to present my work. Basically, if we think about collectivism, it's a form or it's a dimension of culture. So culture is measured at different levels of analysis. So we have individual culture, organizational culture, and culture at the national level. So let's say I am German, I have a different culture than I don't know, somebody from India or wherever, or China. Now, collectivism in itself is one dimension of culture. And it basically is about to what extent I have a predisposition of sharing resources, put it this way, or material, sharing knowledge. To what extent do I want to lean on each other? To what extent do I share reward, for example? Okay, and the notion, what you refer to, think about the neighborhood and to what extent, let's say, we imitate what our neighbor does. Let's say I had this discussion the other day. If I see my neighbor is doing everything well in terms of recycling, using the right bins and whatever, I feel obliged to do the same. Vice versa, I can react if my neighbor doesn't do his recycling properly, I might not do that either, right? So basically, this is what these two terms means, which are central to my research and also central, I suppose, to supply chain management.
No, that's a very clear explanation, and it was important because I'm supposed to go to my daughter's class and explain to her these words tomorrow. So
there you go.
My other question again. I have run a few companies, and I read this paper and I say that my 24 hours are extremely busy. If there are few things that I want to get out of it as a nugget, what would that be? So my first question that came across to me is, if I'm a CEO of a multinational company and or a country manager for a multinational company for that matter, what are the top three things in terms of how do I take advantage of local culture, which most of us don't think. We go over there, we hire local people, but advantage of the local culture for better supply chain integration and better profitability. What are the, let's say, the top three things you would recommend?
Right, great question. First of all, I think it's important to realize that country specifics and context matters. And not only in supply chain management, but in all over my field. There is a lot of research on culture matters in terms of quality management, in terms of lean improvement. And here we identified that firstly, whether you are situated in a collectivistic country or in a less collectivistic country, you have differences in efficacy in applying supply chain. That's one thing. So you might need to push, so that would be the second takeaway, in a less collectivistic, so in a very individualistic environment, you might need to push more your workers or actively manage them to practice supply chain integration. Whilst in a very collectivistic environment, so in a country where we have high levels of collectivism, it might come more natural. That's the second takeaway.
Can you give me an example?
Sorry?
Can you give me an example of your second point? Can you make it real by giving an example? When you say you're pushing on individual rather than a collective, what would be an example for that?
What I mean by that is that if your workers in your organization have a general predisposition in working individually, right? There, in that kind of environment, we need to maybe actively manage them, so enhance and highlight the importance of supply chain integration, rather than if I am if I have workers that are already with a collectivistic mindset, for them it comes more natural. And what is very important, or what we've found in this research, is that there is a difference between internal and external supply chain integration. So we divided internal versus external. So internal supply chain integration in layman's term would mean, to what extent do I integrate with bill from finance department? Right? External integration is, to what extent do I work together with buyers and suppliers, right? And that's how we also conceptualized it in this paper. So we find that the effect of culture is much more prominent in an internal supply chain environment than in an external supply chain. So that would be my second point. My third point is, which is generally widely accepted by managers, practitioners, as well as in the literature, is that supply chain integration matters in terms of performance. And we have conceptualized performance by operational performance in terms of cost, quality, delivery.
No, thank you. That actually segues into my second question. If I look at culture, there are certain cultures and countries that are what I call high context society, meaning they're so closely knit together. Example would be a country like India, or some countries in Asia, or even Latin America, versus a low context, more individualistic cultures like in Europe or in North America. So what differences did you find in terms of managing supply chain integration in cultures that are either a low context or a high context culture?
So generally speaking, collectivistic values inherently promote, as I said, the collective distribution of values and the resource. And this is reflected in the manager's, I guess, predisposition for supply chain integration. So collectivism means, in other words, that I am looking out for my neighbors, if we use the example before, right? And that generally implies a certain level of connection that I have with my neighbor, right? Whilst if we go, like, let's say I'm German, I would probably not be inclined to lean on my neighbor in a way that others might do, now generally speaking. So if I'm in an environment where people are less connected and there are more distance to each other, then we would have to go back to what you said in your first question, is that me as a manager, I need to actively manage this situation, right? I need to be aware that if I work in an international team, right, and I have a procurement manager or director that's German versus one that's I don't know, South America, for example, which is more collectivistic, I need to generally and actively manage and promote the connection that is required within the firm and external.
No, that's a very interesting answer. And following the same line of thought, have you seen differences between developed and developing countries in your research? Was there that angle also that can help a practitioner who's wanting to learn from your paper?
So generally speaking, we find that the mechanism of collectivism promoting internal supply chain integration, and that supply chain integration affects operational performance is we found across those 7 countries that we had. In our sample that we had, the countries were all relatively high developed, I would say.
Okay.
So we had countries such as Germany, Australia, the US, which are all relatively highly developed. So maybe a short answer to your question, no, we didn't find differences. But truthfully, we were not actively looking for differences. Yeah. We were looking for differences in cultural difference.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very interesting point. Maybe that could be a topic of your next research, to have the same angle.
That's right. And in fact, Hitendra, I have been looking at these kind of differences. I have, for example, been looking at the importance of logistical capabilities from a country level, how that promotes or hinders supply chain integration. I would have been looking in previous research into things like rule of law and things like that, differences, how that requires different styles of supply chain management. But this is a very interesting angle.
No, thank you. And my final question to you is actually something that as a CEO, I would ask you, that if there are 3 key takeaways or advice that you would give me to be a better CEO or a country manager that takes into account your 2 concepts, the culture, national collectivism, and neighborhood of symptom rule, and using that to make me a better CEO, what would your advice be?
Well, firstly, I think it's important, and it sounds simple, but it's often brushed aside, is that culture and country specificities, they matter, right? In terms of how my team is combined, where are the nationalities, where are they coming from, their background and their culture matters. That's one takeaway for me. Second important takeaway for me is that internal supply chain integration and external supply chain integration differ. And me as a manager, I need to view them differently. And the importance of culture is much more predominant in my organization than if I would go outside, right? And it probably makes sense, like, if I'm going outside, right, I much more depend on, I guess, the advices I get from my boss or from my superior. How do I react? To what extent do I collaborate with my buyers or suppliers? That will be the second point. And the last point is stressing again the importance for your performance and what you can achieve purely by integrating with your buyers, suppliers, and your functional teams within your organization. I think these are the 3 points. Culture, country specificities matters. We have the differences between internal and external supply chain integration, actively management, and thirdly, the performance.
So in closing, if you have done research, that'll be fantastic. But if you were to guess, if I took your advice and if I implemented things that you are recommending, what kind of benefit, quantifiable benefits, or even non-quantifiable benefits could I see in my organization?
I suppose if you think about it externally, integration leading to, I guess I would always categorize them in efficiency and effectiveness gains. So efficiency gains is you might be able to speed up the processes, to increase the delivery speed, right? But then if I look on the other side into your effectiveness, it may also go into dimension you would not necessarily think about it at the beginning, such as you might be able to increase your innovativeness, right? Your product performance comes up, you have improvements in quality and such matters. So to achieve those performance benefits, my research says here that you need to take into consideration culture, i.e. collectivism.
Thank you. No, I think this was absolutely fantastic. Frank, this was an eye-opener. I mean, there are a lot of things that we assume. Yes, we have to work. It's more psychology and sociology. We need to work with the local culture, but putting it into a very clear conceptual framework and to in a way quantify things that we need to do because it will benefit both efficiency as well as effectiveness, and putting a number on it, I think is an eye-opener. So again, on behalf of GMRG, thank you very much for attending this interview and having this interview. And hopefully we'll get to see more research coming out of you in this area.
Great. Thank you very much.